All right. So my goal for today's orientation is that you would walk away understanding a little bit more about who refugees are, what it takes to be a refugee, and then I also want to explain the difference between a refugee and what I will continue to call APA, our Afghan arrivals. So APA is the Afghan Placement Assistance Program. And so that actually is different than the refugee program, and I'm going to go into that, as well as a little bit more about what Inspiritus does, who we are, our mission, things like that. At the end of the training, I'll have an opportunity for questions. I'll try to keep this around an hour. I love to share stories, so sometimes my stories get us a little long, but I'll try to keep it succinct and just to relevant information so that we can all wrap up our Sunday. Let's see. All right, so Inspiritus' mission is to guide individuals and families on a path from surviving to thriving. What that means is we take families who are, just initially have their basic needs met, come alongside them and teach them, empower them, provide them the resources for them to be able to move towards thriving and self-sufficiency, essentially, in the end. You most likely are familiar with our Refugee and Immigrant Services program, and that's the program that we're going to be talking most extensively about today. But I wanted to make sure you also know that Inspiritus has other programs other than our Refugee and Immigrant Services program. We have a Children and Family Services, Disaster Response, and Disabilities Services. All of our departments are pretty siloed, but some of them are operating in different offices. Like in our Savannah office, we do have disability services operating out of that office as well. In our Nashville, Tennessee office, we've got Children and Family Services, Disaster Response, and then in Birmingham, we're going to have Refugee and Immigrant Services, or actually already have Immigrant Services, are starting to place refugees there. But we used to all be housed in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, on Peachtree Street, in a high-rise. That was where our main headquarters was, our home office, until the pandemic. And then we got out of that lease. We all started working remotely, working from home, but we do still have brick and mortar offices in Savannah, in Birmingham, as far as for Refugee and Immigrant Services, and then in the Clarkston, Stone Mountain area in Atlanta. So there are actually 9 refugee resettlement agencies in the US. Of those 9, 4 are operating in the Atlanta area. And of those 4, Inspiritus is the only one that has an office outside of the Atlanta area in Savannah, resettling refugees. So Inspiritus is not one of those 4. Our Refugee and Immigrant Services are under the affiliate of the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. That's our national affiliate. So we were welcoming and serving refugees and asylees, Afghan immigrants, and also unaccompanied immigrant children, which I'll talk a little bit about because I think it's one of our least known services. Here, I'll go ahead. So we're working with unaccompanied immigrant children. We do not have a program. LIRS, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, has a program for fostering unaccompanied immigrant children who are coming as refugees from other parts of the world. The only unaccompanied immigrant children we're working with are kids that were separated on our southern border and have been placed in detention housing there. Their family members or sponsors can apply through a fingerprinting process to become a sponsor for those children. And we have something called a Safe Release program that provides case services to kids who are being sponsored by generally family members. So like I said, today I want to talk about refugees and asylees primarily, and our Afghan immigrants. So let's start with understanding the difference between the Refugee Resettlement and the Afghan Placement Assistance Program. If you look at this, these statistics, you'll notice that there are a lot more displaced people than there are refugees. So it looks like under the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, there are 20.7 million refugees. But if you look at the number of internally displaced people there, which is 48 million, that's a lot higher. I'll explain the difference between internally displaced and refugees. I believe in the next slide. So refugee resettlement, we've been doing here in the US for almost 40 years. I like to describe it as a well-oiled machine. It's pretty organized. It's something we've been doing for a long time. We're familiar with it. We know what we're doing. In comparison to the Afghan Placement Assistance Program, which is very chaotic and is new, I try to empathetically describe it as a rescue effort. So it's more like building a plane in flight. It's a lot more challenging for us to, the Afghan Placement Assistance Program has been much more challenging. We don't have as many answers. It's changing a lot versus our refugee program. So the refugee resettlement is only for the most vulnerable refugees in the world, which include women and girls at risk, survivors of violence and torture, family reunification, those with high medical needs, or children at risk. Less than 1% of the world's refugees are ever resettled into a third country. So in regards to refugee resettlement, and the reason our Afghans who are coming here are not refugees, is the US only does what we call third country resettlement. That means that they had to have fled their home country, crossed an international border, tried to resettle in a secondary country, and then go through the refugee process, which we'll talk about, become a refugee, and then be resettled to a third country. So that's why with our Afghans, they came directly from Afghanistan, well, I mean, via bases overseas, but basically were taken from there to the US and to apply for different visa statuses here in the US. To be a refugee, you have to have applied overseas, gained refugee status, and then been invited to the US to resettle. The US is one of 28 countries that does third country refugee resettlement, and less than 1% are actually resettled. And so I like to make sure we explain that, because if you go back to there are internally displaced people, or people who fled their country, their area, their state, their territory, but did not cross an international border. So you can't qualify for a refugee if you don't cross an international border. Sorry, I'm continuing to admit people. An externally displaced person is someone who's crossed an international border, but they did not flee for reasons of persecution or fear of persecution, which I'll get into a little bit more. 68%, this is in 2021, of our refugees originated from just 5 countries. Okay, so this number, I actually made this graphic before my orientation, I think like the last week of October, and already things have changed so much. But I wanted you to have just kind of a visual of what it looks like when we say we're overwhelmed, or we're busy, or we have a lot going on. In FY 2016, so we work on a fiscal year. That means October 1st to September 30th. That was under President Obama's administration. We were resettling around 604 refugees, actually 604 refugees through Inspiritus in the Atlanta area. In Savannah, we had 122. So total in Inspiritus in FY 2016, we had 726 refugee arrivals in Georgia. FY 2017, it was a little lower, 416 in Atlanta, 88 in Savannah, a total of 504. You'll see under President Trump's administration, he put a couple of executive orders and bans on arrivals and things like that. It dropped down to 115 refugees resettled in Atlanta that year, 32 in Savannah, for a total of 147. A couple of years later, you'll see that we're still trending around. It was 108 in Atlanta, 25 in Savannah, for a total of 133. The implications of that are that we had to reduce our staff, reduce our office space, reduce our programs that we offered because the funding wasn't there. So to go from that, and then we started in FY 21, we heard that this coming year we were going to be increasing, but even last year we still only resettled 108 refugees in Atlanta, 25, and Savannah, to be a total of 133 in the entire year. So we're going into FY 2022 with that as our, kind of new normal. It has been our normal for 5 years. And then you have the Afghan crisis. So this was actually, these numbers were actually for 1 week. The first week in October, we had resettled 12 refugees, 53 Afghans in Atlanta, 8 refugees and 14 Afghans in Savannah, for a total of 86 Afghans. And actually it was 2 weeks, in the first 2 weeks of October. We heard this week that we're going to be resettling 400 Afghans in Atlanta between now and the end of the year. So if you'll look back to our numbers, that's almost as many, well, that is 416 is the number of refugees that we resettled in Atlanta in an entire year. And we're anticipating in getting those in the next 8 weeks, that number. And I believe in Savannah, they're like around 80 to 100 as well. So let me go back though and just make sure, I want to make sure you understand the difference between a refugee and what we call an APA. So I told you refugees have fled their home country and crossed an international border. What I didn't say is that refugees, they have to cross their home country, fled their home country, crossed the international border because of persecution or fear of persecution. So they actually have to prove that they've been persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. So they go through extensive interviews and, okay, thanks. I'm just, Lindsay, making sure that she knows that if you want to check the chat box, you'll have our information there. Thank you, Lindsay. So they have to have fled their home country, crossed the international border, and prove that they've been persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Not included on this list is natural disaster or economic turmoil. So if someone flees their country, crosses the international border because of a mudslide or tsunami or things like that, they cannot qualify as a refugee. That's why you get externally displaced persons, people who have fled their country for other reasons than persecution. And then also going back to the APAs, again, they did not have the opportunity or privilege to flee their country and try to resettle somewhere else. They were taken from their country and brought here. So they're under what's called humanitarian parolee status. It's a visa status. That means that they're going to have to apply in country for either SIV, a special immigration visa, or asylum, or a few other refugees, or a few other statuses. They will not be able to qualify as a refugee. When I talk about APA program being chaotic, when Afghans first arrived at the end of August, we were told that they were not going to have access to any of the social services that our refugees have access to. So like food stamps, Refugee Medicaid, WIC for moms, women and children, any kind of insurance for their children, things like that. Pretty quickly, the government realized that that was going to cause an undue burden on the communities that they were resettled in, and made changes to that where they would be allowed to be, they're eligible for, it started with some benefits. Over time, it's increased, so now they're actually receiving the same benefits as our refugees receive, which is wonderful news because it means we can enroll them in our multiple programs like economic empowerment and social adjustment, things like that we have at Inspiritus. The one major difference now is the path to citizenship. There is not a path to citizenship currently for our Afghan clients. And refugees can apply for citizenship after 5 years. And they have to apply for their EAD, their employment, their work permit essentially. And our refugees come immediately able to work, like off the plane, they can get a job, they have their work permit. Now I do know that, departments are expediting the work permits for Afghan clients. I think it's around 6-ish weeks, hopefully. So that's not long. They will be able to get a job. And we also will, our programs that help with employment are going to be funded to assist them to find jobs. they're just not able to work immediately. And what I'm finding is that our Afghans are really eager to work. They're extremely qualified employees. You know, we're getting the cream of the crop. We've had journalists and engineers and financial executives and doctors, people who had, you know, incredible education and degrees in their country and speak English and are ready to work here. So I do believe that we will be able to find them jobs, even though it probably will be jobs that are kind of below them. And I think it's important for us to understand that among all the things that they've lost, their homes, a lot of them, their families, their identities, their jobs, there's a grief that comes with, like I mentioned, them losing their identity. And them not being able to, if you know, they pursued higher education and studied and went to university and got degrees, and then now they come to the US and they're having to work in factories and you know, kind of in labor forces until they're able to either get their degrees you know, translated somehow, transferred to the US, or enroll in some certification programs or things like that. But there's a grief associated with that as well. And I think it's important for volunteers to acknowledge that. All right, let's keep going. So with refugees, the pathway to resettlement is, again, you leave your home country because of persecution or fear of persecution. In the secondary country, you register with UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. You begin the resettlement program or process, which includes lots of background screenings, medical screenings, interviews. They separate the family out and interview each of them to determine whether their stories are accurate or correct, and eventually give, you know, conditional approval to some people. Once they are approved, refugee status, you know, you're awarded refugee status, then the countries that are wanting to resettle them, like the US, can then do additional, what we call additional security screenings. I think that age-old phrase that if you want it done right, do it yourself. The US kind of ascribes to that. So they do their own screenings all over. They start with, you know, screening them again for whether their stories are straight, whether they, you know, can prove that they've been persecuted, do background checks, they do biometric checks, these like eye screenings, they do health screenings, things like that. And then once you're approved to come to the US, then it's actually called IOM, International Office of Migration, coordinates their travel from their secondary country to the new home. So they're booking the flights, they're taking care of any layovers, and then that's also, it is not a free ride to the US. Refugees understand and they sign a commitment to start paying back their flight as soon as they arrive. It's one of their first bills that they have. It also allows them to build credit by paying this back on time. So I would say in my experience, most refugees don't want a free ride. They want to be involved in this process of their resettlement. And I've even had a couple who have taken great pride and joy in paying their last payment and have said to me, you know, when I was in the office, that they were so excited that they felt like they were kind of paying it forward. By them paying this off, that maybe someone else would be able to come. I don't think it exactly works that way, but it's neat for them to see, like, I want to pay back into this program because I want more people to have the opportunity that I had. So we find out, for refugees, we find out about 2 weeks in advance, who's coming, when they're coming, things like that. And then, you know, they find out about a month. They start cultural orientation, some basic orientation about the country they're going to. Again, I want to say that there's 28 countries that do refugee resettlement, and that's important to me to note because some people are like, well, if they're coming to America, why don't they speak English? Well, they found out about a month before which country they were going to, so you can't blame them for not learning German and French and Italian and all the other languages that they would need just in case they ended up in that country. With our Afghans, again, let me go back and kind of differentiate the difference. With our Afghans, they were taken out of Afghanistan onto foreign military bases overseas, done initial screenings there just to make sure that there weren't anyone that was dangerous coming to the US. Then they were brought to military bases here in the US. And initially they received basic health screenings, vaccinations. So that includes like typhoid, hepatitis, MMR, all the things that we get as children before we go to school, and also included a COVID vaccine. And when they initially arrived, after they received all their health screenings and their vaccinations, they were free to go. There wasn't yet organized travel for them to go to whichever state or city that they might have connections in, but they were free to go. So we received our first 2 Afghan families that way. One of them actually paid a hotel employee to drive them to Georgia. And another one had a friend or family member in Georgia that drove up and picked them up. Well, right after that happened, after we got our first 2, there was a measles outbreak on a military base overseas. And so they implemented a 21-day quarantine across the board. So then all Afghans, wherever they were kind of on hold, freeze for 21 days. During that time, that allowed them to be able to get, like, a lot of the vaccines, you need a second vaccine, 1 to 2 weeks later. So that meant that before we were having to organize that here, and initially they didn't have healthcare. So they were getting their first vaccine for free on base, but then when they got here, we were taking them to the health department. And like I said, for all of their vaccines, including COVID, but others as well, they were kind of on the hook for paying for those. So we were really relieved when they implemented the quarantine, because that meant they could complete all of their vaccinations on base and it would be covered financially. Now they're able to enroll in what we call Refugee Medicaid. So they get 8 or 9 months of healthcare. And one of the things that we do is find someone in the home a job where they can have benefits, make sure that they can enroll in insurance before that Medicaid runs out. So that gave us kind of a pause, a little bit of time. So if you interacted with us at all during that time, it was like, well, we know we're going to be getting Afghans, but we haven't yet. And then once that was over, it was like the floodgates open. Everyone's ready to get off of base. The bases are ready to get them off. And we just started seeing, 6, 7, 8 arrivals a week. Well, gosh, more than that, because some days it's 2 or 3 in a day, families. And then we found out last week that we've resettled over 100 Afghans in the last 6 weeks, but we should be resettling, like I said, around 400 in the Atlanta area, and I think around 100 in Savannah in the next 6 weeks. So it's going to be very, very busy, and we definitely need your help. We've been putting a lot of our Afghans in Airbnbs. We have a partnership with Airbnb who helps provide funding to a certain extent. And that allows us a week or 2 to find affordable housing, which is our biggest challenge. And it's not only affordable housing that's the biggest challenge, really the challenge. So if you know any landlords or any connections with anyone who has, maybe even like a house to rent or, property or whatever, because our refugees and our Afghans, the challenge is that they can't submit a traditional background check. Like if you're going to lease an apartment, if you just went to the apartment on the corner near your house and talked to them about what the process was for renting an apartment, they're going to want work history, a deposit, and a background check. Well, we can make sure they have the deposit. To a certain extent, they can have some work history, but it generally doesn't translate here, meaning like most people don't approve it because they can't have like pay stubs and all of that. And then they can't do a traditional background check because they don't have a social security card yet. So we can explain like the background screenings that they've had to do, like way more extensive than your background check that they're gonna run. But most of the time, leasing offices are just not interested in dealing with the complication of it, and they just say no. That's why here in the Atlanta area, we resettle so many people in the Clarkston-Tucker area, Clarkston, Stone Mountain, Tucker area, because we have relationships with apartment complexes and leasing offices that we've been working with for years. They understand that it's very low risk, and generally most of our refugees are upwardly mobile. So after a year, they're moving out, and then we're moving new people in. So generally for apartment complexes, it's kind of they can have confidence that they're always going to have a tenant. All right, so let's talk about what we do. This is for all of our clients, refugees or Afghans. Pre-arrival through the first 24 hours. So we're finding an apartment for them. We do accept furniture donations in Savannah. I believe it's pretty full, our storage area there. And also there's a challenge as far as getting the apartment set up, like getting the furniture from the storage to the apartment. So if you wanted to help with an apartment setup and you wanted to gather all the things that we need, which I could send you a list, all the things that were required to put in an apartment, then it would be helpful if you could collect it and have it until the day of move-in. We don't really have a place to store it between you donating it and the apartment being set up. So you would coordinate with Lindsay just to say, well, I've got a bookshelf or a coffee table or a lamp or whatever, and she could tell you when we were setting up an apartment. If you were able to bring it then, that's really helpful. If not, we really right now can't accept, we don't have enough storage. In Atlanta, we work with what's called the Welcome Co-op, and the Welcome Co-op actually helps us with the apartment setups for all 4 of the resettlement agencies here in the Atlanta area. And after the Afghan crisis had so much coverage on the news, they're completely full. So I do think we will need donations, especially after the first of the year, once we've gotten so many families and we've cleared out the donations we have. But right now, it's pretty full. So we go to the airport and pick them up. For our refugees, they've been traveling for days, and it's like, welcome to America, your first home. For Afghans, they are coming from off, a base usually. We provide a hot meal, and a hot meal is not actually hot generally, but what it means is like a prepared meal. What we don't want is, again, because considering our refugees, people to have been traveling for days and have jet lag and sensory overload and not understand American appliances fully yet, to have to cook on their first night here. That's just not what we want. It's not what we want for Afghans either. Even if they haven't been traveling for days, they've been, in a transitional place for a long time. And the other day when I picked up an Afghan family coming from Illinois or Indiana, not very far away, I picked them up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon from the Atlanta airport. And he told me that he had been traveling since 4 that morning. Because there were so many people going to the airport from the base, they all had to go together. So even though his flight wasn't until I don't remember, 12 o'clock, they had to leave the base to go to the airport and just wait there until their flight. So he was exhausted. His family was so tired. The kids fell asleep in the car on the way to their apartment. What I don't want for them is to have to do is cook, when they get here. So we stop by like a local grocery store or restaurant and pick up a meal that's already prepared based on the food that they eat. We want to make sure we're feeding them things that they're familiar with, especially if they're coming from another country. Their stomachs aren't ready for, $5 hot and ready pizzas or McDonald's or KFC. We want to make sure we're feeding them food that's going to settle well in their stomachs. We do a basic safety orientation, make sure they know their fire escape route, the fire extinguisher, how to lock and unlock the door, things like that. And then generally we just say, rest, sleep, eat, we'll be back tomorrow. The 24-hour home visit is not 24 hours, it's 24 hours later. We come by, the caseworker comes by or someone on staff and just sits down with the family and talks to them about what are your needs, is anyone sick? Let's talk about what the process is going to be as far as I'm your caseworker. You're going to come to the office for these appointments. Here's what we're going to help you with, what we're not going to help you with. Sometimes they might explain that there is a role of a volunteer involved, things like that. We also then usually take them to the grocery store so that they can buy food that they're familiar with, take them to get a phone if they don't have one. These are kind of things that happen in that 24-hour home visit. Here in Atlanta, but since we have so many arrivals, like I said, multiple a day, almost every day of the week, we're hoping to have a few volunteers that we could call on that could just do this next day home visit. Not the part where we're covering like what the caseworker is going to do and things like that, but to just take someone in the family, not the whole family, to the grocery store and get a few groceries. Take them to get a phone if they need a phone. This is all going to come out of money that they're given, so you wouldn't be paying for this. It would just purely be transport, the time it takes to take them to the store. I think it'd be really fun to be able to have that engagement with families. And I know that our caseworkers enjoy that task, but right now when they have to do it multiple times a day or have several families and they have to go to the airport, it's kind of a time-consuming thing that we're hoping to kind of take off their plate by just having volunteers kind of like not on call, but like I could say on Monday, here are the arrivals this week, would you be available any day this week to do this? And it really could be based on your time as well. Like it's pretty flexible when you would be available. All right, so in the first 30 days, we're doing an individual family service plan, needs assessment, addressing their physical health. So do they have any high blood pressure, or diabetes, or ailments that they need addressed? Their mental health. So
like it's spreadsheet.
Oh, someone is not on mute. I might be able to mute them for here. So everyone always asks me, what about mental health? Mental health is complicated because in a lot of cultures, people are not comfortable with talk therapy with a therapist, a counselor. So oftentimes we have to go the route of medicinal, addressing it through medicine, taking them to a doctor. But we do have access to, in Atlanta, to several, something called Positive Growth and a couple other programs that work with immigrants surrounding mental health. So it is something that we're keenly aware of. Our after school program is run by a licensed therapist who is trained in trauma resilience and trauma-informed care. And so our youth are definitely receiving counseling and programming to meet those needs. But with adults, it's something we have to like introduce and ask if it's something they'd be comfortable with. Going back to talking, if there's a language barrier, a lot of times they're not comfortable talking to an interpreter who then talks to a therapist. So it's trying to find people, therapists, who speak their language. When it's addressing housing issues, a lot of times families don't feel like the housing, especially our Afghan families, are not comfortable in the housing that we found for them. It's really beneath them, and that's understandable. And so we really just have to talk through the challenges that we're facing regarding finding housing and empower them that if they have any friends or they have any family or any connections that can help them, they are free to find other housing options on their own. They're not required for limited to us, only the things that we can find. So we do a cultural orientation. That's a series of 4 classes that's around 4 hours long. My son actually brought this up the other day. He was, for some reason, very concerned that a mom might get her children taken away because she was disciplining them in a way that was culturally appropriate, but not appropriate here in the US. And I explained to him that is actually something we cover in cultural orientation. We talk about things like that, like, the laws in the US, you can't drink until you're 21, you can't, sell your food stamps, you can't drink and drive. We talk about when you call 911, you can ask for the ambulance, the fire truck, or police. We help them try to be able to at least read, write, and say their address. So if they have to call 911, we try to explain to them that you don't have to go to the hospital for everything here in the US. You can go to a doctor, and we're going to enroll them in a PCP, a primary care physician, and explain the process of setting up an appointment and going to the doctor. We talk about employee rights and they're expected to be ready for work and show up at work on time. We explain the concept of calling in sick and what that looks like, and how you can't just not show up and then later tell your boss that you weren't feeling well. You have to give a notice. We talk about hygiene and how in the US body odor is not acceptable. In a lot of countries, body odor is very typical, it's common, and it's not something that it needs to be addressed or fixed. But here in the US, you're expected to not smell bad. We talk about like even a deodorant going along the lines of that. And in a lot of countries, it's more common for a deodorant to be a spray, an aerosol, or a roller ball. And here in the US, our most common deodorant is a stick that you roll up, right? And even though we explain all of this stuff, this is really helpful things for volunteers to reinforce because they're learning a lot of information over those 4 days. Sometimes it's 2 days a week and then 2 days the next week. Sometimes it's 4 days in a row, just based on everyone's schedule. They are doing this with an interpreter. So they're hearing it in their own language, but it's just a lot of information to learn. And like I went into the home and apartment of a brother and sister who spoke English. They're pretty westernized family. And I used their restroom and I noticed their deodorant was in the shower. And I didn't have a relationship with them, so I didn't want to cause them shame by pointing it out to them. So I went back to their caseworker and mentioned it. And the caseworker revisited it with them. And sure enough, they thought the deodorant was soap because of the way it rolls up, which I think is brilliant. Honestly, I wish someone would design a soap that you could roll up and like, you know, use instead of having to hold the bar. I thought it was a great idea. But things like that. Another thing that we talk about in orientation, but I think so helpful for volunteers, is the concept of cold storage in a refrigerator, right? And how like we have certain foods that are required to be refrigerated. Based on country, that might be different. The way we process our food is different than the way other people do. And so they may have food that they're not used to needing, you know, requiring refrigeration. And you might have to explain to them that they do. Another thing I never noticed or thought about until I started working here is that you can go into the grocery store in the, you know, middle aisles, not the outer area of the grocery store, and take something off of the shelf. And you go home, you use it. I think if you didn't read the label, like if you didn't speak English or it's not something you're used to needing refrigerated, you would just put it back on your shelf in your pantry. So the concept of refrigerate after opening is something that we just like inherently know. Like we just know some items have to be refrigerated even though you took it off of a shelf. And a lot of our refugees think I took it off a shelf, so I put it back on a shelf in my house. So things like that are things that volunteers are really helpful with. We enroll them into food stamps, Medicaid. For our refugees, they're eligible to get a Social Security card. They're signing the lease. So both our Afghans and our refugees are responsible for their lease. So we explain it to them. We make sure they understand, you know, the rules of the lease, and that if they are going to leave early, they have to put in a notice. They wouldn't get back their deposit. We enroll the utilities in their name. We have a clothing closet, so we take all of our refugees at least once, and Afghans more if they need it, to a clothing closet. Kids have to have closed-toe shoes to go to school, so we want to make sure that they have those. This winter and every winter we do what we call a hope tree, which is our winter coat drive. So we're collecting coats for all of the families that we resettle this year, which can be quite overwhelming when you consider we're going to be resettling 400 between now and into December. But I will say, I'm not as nervous about all of the Afghans that we're going to be resettling in the next few weeks, because a lot of them are coming from cities and states that are colder than where they're resettling to here in Georgia. So often, like the families I've been picking up, I've noticed have already gotten a coat that's been donated to them on base. But we're going back all the way to Christmas last year. And so our Sudanese families and Congolese families, and a lot of our families we resettled this year, have never experienced a winter. And if you think about trying to purchase a winter coat for every person in your family, that's a huge expense and can be just above what people can really afford, you know, on top of their monthly expenses. So that's why we collect coats every winter as a part of our Hope Tree program. And then the week of Christmas, we distribute them to everyone that's we've received. We teach them how to use public transportation, enroll the adults in English, do a health screening, make sure all the kids are enrolled in school. We have 30 days to do this. And I think that's really important for volunteers to understand, because you can reiterate this to the Afghan and refugee families. They want their kids to be in school like yesterday. But for our refugee families, we have to make sure they've gone through both rounds of their vaccinations before their kids can go to school. And they usually have to have 2 weeks between them. So there's a few weeks before they're eligible for school. For Afghan families, because they're receiving their vaccines on base, they're ready. But there's just documents that have to get in place, and we have some time. There's so much we're trying to do in this first few weeks that we have a little bit of time before we can enroll them in school. Also, if they're in an Airbnb, we're not wanting to enroll their kids in school near the school nearest to the Airbnb instead of the bus there. We're really wanting to get them settled into their, permanent long-term housing before we enroll them in school. And then we do a job orientation. Like I said, we're helping all of our families find a job. Generally the men, but doesn't have to be. It can be, some of the older children. And we love to find women jobs as long as they have all of their kids are in school. If they have kids at home, then they generally need to stay at home just because childcare is so expensive. And we are creating a budget and working with them on that budget. And we really manage their money for the first 90 days. Their money being money that we receive to care for them. And then we sit down, the caseworker sits down and shows them how much they're spending, what it's costing, what they get in food stamps, how much they're getting in their job, things like that, and kind of walk them through what it's going to cost and if there's an opportunity to save any money or if there are any gaps in income, things like that. All right, man, So ideally in the 6 to 8 months, they're connected to other families in their area and they're moving towards self-sufficiency. I'm gonna move a little fast just because of time. So I keep talking about money that we receive for them, what we call 90-day money or a one-time grant. I forget how much it is per person, but out of that, we're not allowed to accept donated beds or pillows. So we have to buy new beds and pillows for them. We pay for their first month to month and a half of rent. That means before they've gotten a job, they have money to cover rent. Their first month's water bill, and so their utilities, the food allowance, that's at one time, like we take them to the grocery store right after they arrive. It doesn't always mean one time. Sometimes it can be once or twice before their food stamps arrive. And then we are required to provide certain items in their home. So any item that we don't get donated, we have to buy for them. Most of the time, that's like a kitchen table and chairs. We have to provide one chair for every person. And so we'll get like the plastic Office Max folding table and the metal folding chairs. And I get criticized from volunteers sometimes of like, really, like that's what you gave them? And so I like to cover an orientation and explain the background behind that. We are wanting to give as much of this money back to them as possible. Like whatever we don't spend, we can give directly to the family. So we're not wanting to go out and make style decisions about how, do they want a wood table or a glass table? Like how much should we be spending on a kitchen table? When the truth is they might not want to sit at a kitchen table, dining room table, right? Like they may prefer to just move the table and roll out a mat and sit on the floor based on where they're coming from. But because we're required to provide it, we kind of provide like the bare minimum baseline so that we haven't spent any more money than we have to. Some other things that we're required to provide is a plug-in alarm clock for every house, which I think is funny. A few hangers. We're not required to provide a TV, coffee table, bookshelf. Everyone wants a TV. So if ever you wanted to donate a TV to a family, they always want TVs. We have to provide a lamp in every room that doesn't have an overhead light. And so if it's an apartment, oftentimes the living room and even the bedrooms will not have overhead lights. So we have to provide lamps for that. And I didn't realize before I started working here, but lamps, every lamp turns on different, basically. You've got like on the cord, or you've got the twist, or you've got the back and forth, or you step on it. There's so many ways to turn on a lamp. So part of that home orientation when we first moved them in is walking around and just explaining to them how to turn on and off their lamps. All right, I wasn't going to tell too many stories because we got too much to talk about. So here are the programs that we cover at Inspiritus. I've told you the most about what we call RMP, reception and placement. All of that 30-day, up to 24 hours, 30 days, up to 6 to 8 months. That is all RMP. The cultural orientation is part of that. Employment services, all part of RMP. I mentioned we also have a trauma and resilient youth programs. That's an after-school program, which we have a virtual after-school program in Savannah. So if you're wanting to volunteer, you're still kind of nervous about COVID, we need volunteers in our after-school program. It's Monday through Thursday, 4:30 to 6, and we have youth who jump on and want help with homework, but also mentoring and just to have a connection with American Friend. We have two other programs, intensive case management and social adjustment services. They're very similar, but one is kind of episodic and one intensive case management is for an entire year. People who have been here within 5 years can enroll in those programs. So you don't have to be new, but you have to have some life event. So a medical issue has come up, you've got divorced or domestic abuse, something like that. Generally, it's a diagnosis, honestly, and you don't know how to navigate our medical system. So you can have a caseworker who comes alongside you and works with you, through the duration of that time based on, for social adjustment, they set certain goals, and then once they're achieved, you can be done with the program. For intensive case management, we actually enroll some of our clients who the learning curve is just too severe. And we're talking about people who are coming from countries that don't have running water or electricity, and they come to America and there's just so much to learn that they're not ready to be on their own in 90 days. So we can enroll them in intensive case management just to have a caseworker who walks alongside them for longer. And Match Grant Early Self-Sufficiency is a program that we're allowed to provide 180 days of case services for clients that are enrolled in that, but we are required to match the amount of money that we spend serving them in those programs with volunteer hours and gifts in kind. So we'll talk more about logging your hours and just how important that is. And that's because if we don't meet our match, then next year we're given less money and less slots or opportunities to enroll people in. So logging your hours is one of the most important things you can do as a volunteer. Beyond giving your time is making sure we have documentation of your time. Okay, so this is the APA suggested service timeline. I'm just going to kind of move on because it's basically the same. There's really not much difference other than at 7 days applying for EAD, which is their work permit. I already mentioned this. We're going to keep going because I have so much to say and not much time. All right, let's talk about developing cultural competency and sensitivity. So in the US, we have an American culture and customs. We prize equality and independence and individualism, success and hard work and truth and honesty. We're very time oriented. We expect you to be on time. We schedule things out 2 weeks and 2+ weeks. I can have lunch with you for, from 1:45 to 2:35 on Wednesday. I have got something starting at 2:45. Whereas people who are coming from Afghanistan and a lot of our other cultures are more relationally focused. They don't care about time, they care about relationships. You'll notice that. So we have to teach them how to be on time and how important time is, but you also have to understand that part of valuing their culture is that maybe you have some compromise where you just sit and be with them. But it means you have to respect that their culture as well. So our privacy is really important. We're very informal. I talked about personal hygiene. So it's helpful to walk into another culture, in the home of another culture, and realize you have to meet them with respect for their culture. So is it addressing the man in the household? Making sure that cross-genders don't touch? Do you remove your shoes when you enter the home? Understanding that we think truth and honesty is so important, but in other cultures, some cultures, shame and preventing shame is the most important thing. So maybe they won't tell you that you're wrong about something because they wouldn't want to shame you. So like if I said, is the bathroom down on the right? They'd be like, yes, because they don't want me to feel shame that I was wrong. Instead of, if I could ask a question of, which direction do I go to the bathroom? Then I might get a more accurate answer. But if I went down on the right and looked for the bathroom, it wasn't there, I could get mad. You said it was on the right. You said, when I asked, is it down on the right? You said yes. So just understand that you may be communicating, not only may there be a language barrier, but there might also be a cultural barrier there as well. And just try to be respectful of other people's culture. We're going to keep going through this. So it's important to set boundaries. It's okay to say no. We prefer you not to give financially directly to our clients, but to give to inspirit us and let us give it to them, even if it's a need that you're trying to meet, mainly because we really try to prevent the Santa Claus mentality. We don't want them to be just asking you for something and you give it every time, like asking and you receive. Because what we're trying to do is really empower them to meet their needs. So instead, maybe you could say, well, I can take you to the store for that. Or, could you ask so-and-so for that? But if it's something that you have that you want to help provide, that's totally fine. It's just better if you give it to us, and if we are able to say, a volunteer provided this, then they're not expecting something from you every time. You know, if at all possible, the whole teach a person to fish, like I use driving versus public transportation. Like if you could go with them on public transportation instead of always driving them, it's okay to drive clients to things, especially if that's helpful or more efficient, but be thinking about how will they get there if you're not there to drive them. So is there some way you could help teach them, maybe even teaching them how to get Uber? Or same thing with paperwork. If you're sitting next to them at the doctor's office, if you could give them the paperwork, and are you able to show them how to fill it out? And if they're not able to read or write English at all, like if you're doing it for them, still walking through it, that is this is name, and I'm writing your name, birthday, you know, things like that. Everything you're doing, you're trying to kind of work yourself out of a job. What would this look like if they had to do this on their own without me here? So what can I teach them about this process? I think it's important to remember that there are two sides to every story. Our refugees and our immigrants are extremely resilient, and that they're very comfortable advocating for themselves and their needs. So that means they might ask for the same thing over and over and over again. They might ask, you know, each person in your team, even though they've gotten the answer no. I think in American culture, we're like, once we hear no, we like kind of shy away from asking again. And I'm finding in other cultures that doesn't faze them at all. They'll ask again and again and again, see if they get a different answer, or they ask a different person. So I think it's important to understand that it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no multiple times. And if you're hearing things, especially with our Afghan clients, I keep hearing this from our staff. Our staff is begging me to explain to you and help you understand that our Afghans are not happy. They're very unhappy with this process. They experienced a trauma, a very recent trauma, and they're responding to that and reacting to that through, and anger is a secondary emotion, right? So it's easier for them to be angry than for them to process the grief that they've been through. Truly, they're sad. They're grieved that they're not at home, that their home was taken from them, and they can't be there. So generally what that looks like is they're angry they're not working. They're angry that their kids are not in school. They're angry that we can't give them what they need when they need it right now. And they think they want to drive. I had some clients in here the other day, I'm at our office, yelling at our caseworker because he literally said, he's like, I'm used to being able, when I'm told no, to bribe them and then they will tell me yes. And so he was at the driver's license place trying to get a driver's license, and he doesn't have his documents yet. So he didn't have what he needed in order to take the test. And he was like, I tried to bribe the guy and he still told me no. And he was so angry. He was really angry with the time, having to wait, that this process is taking a long time. I picked up another family from the airport, and he was explaining how hard it's been that on the base they're separated by gender. So his family's been separated for, you know, a month. And it's just been really hard on them emotionally. And then now we're taking them to an Airbnb where they can be together, but it's not where they're going to be long term. And so they've just been in transition and transition and transition, and they're just so tired of being in transition. They just want to be wherever it is that they're going to be. They're ready to start their new normal. And so they're taking that out on our client, on our staff, on our volunteers. And I think it's just really helpful to know there's two sides to every story. So if you're hearing a bunch of stuff about Inspiritus or about our caseworkers, there might be part of it that's true. I think it's helpful for you to come back to me and be like, this is what I heard, and I can look into it. But it also, what I most often find when I go back to our staff is like, no, that's not at all what I told them. What I told them was this. What they heard is this. And so if you could just kind of keep in mind that there are two sides to every story. And the side you're getting may be the side they're using to try to get a different answer. You know, again, this is with the teaching and not always doing. You want to try to avoid dependency. We really are trying to avoid an imbalance of power too. If you can, you're a friend. You're there to be a friend, not to be a provider for them. Yes, they need help, but they need you to come alongside them, not someone who's just doing things for them all of the time. And so I try to, like, you know, whenever I introduce new people to families, like, just build a relationship, become a friend, just spend time with them. And through that time, there may be ways you can help them, but are there ways that you can, learn things from them as well? Can they teach you how to cook, or can they teach you about their culture? What is it? Are there things that you can do for each other? Little things. I think that you just want to try to avoid an imbalance of power. If you are planning to be there a certain day and time, it's helpful for you to stick with that. Be ready to separate them. Some of our clients achieve self-sufficiency before you maybe think that they should, and they don't need you anymore. They don't call you, they don't want you to come over, and that can be really hard and it can hurt, but really that's the best case scenario for our clients. And we can find another family that might need your help. And sometimes if you've built a relationship of just mutual friendship, then they may not need you anymore, but they may want to still enjoy spending time with you. We definitely, like I said, need you to document your volunteer hours and miles. I'll go into that a little bit more. Pay attention to meanings of gesture, typical male, female, elder, peer etiquette. Become aware of your own cultural assumptions about eye contact and touching. There is going to be a language barrier. We're finding with our Afghans, most of our Afghan men speak English, most of the women and children don't. And so you can pause between words, speak in simple, short sentences. You don't have to use broken English. Use this, English that is helping them learn correctly. But you don't have to use as many words as maybe you would if you were talking to someone who English is their first language. If you're using children to help interpret, I think that's fine, but just think about, whatever I'm using this child to translate, would I be talking to this child about it, right? So medical conversations, financial conversations, anything that would be sensitive for you to talk to a child, you don't want to use a child to translate that. Be patient. You can write things down. Google Translate is helpful. It's not perfect. Also, just texting. Even if you're sitting in the apartment with them, texting them, sometimes they can translate it on their phone, or it might come to them in the language that they speak, and then they can type it in their language and it will come back to you. Can't tell you how many conversations I've had face-to-face just by texting back and forth. Try to be sensitive to cultural differences regarding dress. Dress comfortably, but appropriate and modest. No proselytizing. I could spend a whole 30 minutes on that, but let me just start high level by saying, as a person of faith, if I were, put through a traumatic experience and my family, my home, and my identity were taken from me, and I was uprooted and put in the middle of Russia, and I don't speak Russian, and I had a group of Russian people come around me and try to help teach me Russian culture. But the only thing that really would get me through that, the only thing that people couldn't take away from me is my faith. You can take everything else away from me, but you cannot take my faith, right? And so if I were uprooted and placed in the middle of Russia, and then people were trying to talk to me in Russian and tell me about their Russian faith, and then I needed to, one, didn't understand very clearly because they're using Russian and some English, but two, we're trying to take the one thing that I still had, I probably just wouldn't invite them back. I probably would say, I can figure this out without you. I need help, but I don't need your help. And I have found that over and over and over and over again with our Syrian, Iraqi, and Afghan clients, that if you are we're with a church or from a church, I don't know if we have any LDS on here, but it's like if a Mormon comes to my door, I'm hiding, right? Curtains closed, everybody be silent, pretend like you're not here. And because that's just not how I want to spend my evening, is dialoguing with someone, from the Church of Latter-day Saints. So that can become the same way, even though you're there to help and you're there to volunteer. If you try to talk to them about faith, religion, Christianity, they may just, I have literally had people kind of push them out, our volunteers out the door, shut the door, and then not allow you to come back. So if that's the quickest way to not get to keep doing what you want to do. I think it's totally fine to ask about religion, but later. That's not the first thing you're talking about. You can ask about their religion, and then you can share about yours, but that all comes through a friendship. And then avoid asking about their story. I can't tell you how many times people want me to tell them, volunteers, about a refugee or immigrant story. I don't know it. I don't get it. They don't give us this bio that explains the trauma that a person's experienced. I can look at what happened, in the news, or I can do some research to find out what's happening in a certain country, and I can kind of deduce what might have happened to this family. But the truth is, they don't tell us. And especially with our Afghan clients, because the trauma was so recent, that even just bringing it up triggers that traumatic response. And I, for one, am not equipped to handle that. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed therapist. I don't know what to do when someone's triggered, traumatically. And so I ask that you just don't worry. It's not the most important thing for you to know. We have a CNBC story that I share with people who, like, if you need to share a story to help, because it does help people relate and connect personally. But we're not asking our Afghans or our refugees about it. If they tell you, then you can listen and honor and respect the fact they've shared something with you. But the truth is, they don't owe you that either. I'm not just opening up my heart to somebody who walks in my door. That takes time. That takes me building a relationship and getting to know someone before they really get to hear about the things that have affected me and ways that have shaped me to be who I am. So just think about it that way. So this is the Cultural Orientation Resource Center. If you want to note this down, this is a website I use to look at what are some conflicts or causes for people to become refugees. This is specifically if you're working with other cultures, really other than Afghans. I think they probably would have Afghanistan on there, but this helps you understand where refugees are coming from, why they fled, where they would have fled to, things like that. All right, we're going to keep going. We ask that you keep information confidential, and that you not take photos, especially don't share photos, most especially of our Afghan clients. That's so extremely sensitive. They still have family members back home that if the Taliban found out that they had family who had come to America, that their family would be threatened by that. So don't take and share photos. We ask that you would change their names. Don't share where they're living if you want to talk about what you're doing with. I think, especially as Thanksgiving coming up, to me, one of the most valuable things you can do as a volunteer, other than the time you serve and documenting that service, is sharing positive stories about immigrants with your friends and family. So you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table. What a wonderful thing to do, to explain to your friends and family about your positive experiences with immigrants. So I'm not saying don't talk about it. I'm just saying if you could keep identifying details out of social media, internet, and things like that. If you write a blog or you post about things, you're welcome to. I like to take pictures of the teacup or people from the back, things like that. You could totally share. We just ask that you please protect, respect their need to protect themselves. All right, we're going to keep going. All right, so the process of volunteering, register what we call an application on our My Volunteer page, attend a volunteer training, check. Congratulations, all of you will have done that. Donate to the background check and complete the background check. And then if you find out volunteers, I usually say are like some of the first eyes and ears in a family. So you might find out about financial hardships or safety concerns, big life changes or abuse or neglect or health concerns, mental health concerns. Please let us know that. If you see any of those things, don't assume that we know. Our caseworkers have a lot of clients that they're having to balance their time, visiting. And so it's really helpful if volunteers, I had a volunteer one time who noticed that several kids in a family were home from school. And it was in March. And she was like, why are your kids home from, not everyone in this family is sick. Why are they all home from school? And the mom didn't understand completely, but she kept asking. And the mom brought the volunteer a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper, it was paper from school where they talked about field day and gave the date of field day. Well, the mom misunderstood that and thought that was the last day of school. So she just didn't send her kids to school after that date. And so that would have become a truancy report, right? So the volunteer was able to say, no, they have to go to school. This was an event, they have to go back to school tomorrow. and things like that. It could have taken weeks for the caseworker to know that had happened, right? So it was so helpful that the volunteer noticed that and was able to bring that up. You may notice signs of depression or abuse. Please make sure that you share those with us, because we can get people connected, like I said, to mental health resources if we know that that's an issue. This used to be something that like really scared people off before COVID. Now we've all lived in a pandemic and this is our new normal, and it's actually really helpful. But don't come in contact with blood or bodily fluids without gloves on. Recommend like latex gloves, hand sanitizer. I say grocery bags. That's for people who are transporting clients who have been like mostly like our rural, like Burmese, and some of our clients who are coming directly from overseas. They're just getting motion sickness pretty easily. So in the car, you guys won't really need to worry about the grocery bags. But we as a staff are required to still wear, we're required to wear masks regardless of vaccination status. You can choose whether you prefer to do that or not. We don't require our clients to wear masks when we're with them, but we always have to wear a mask. And if a kid gets a scraped knee or a bloody nose or changing a diaper, I always just usher them back to a parent or sibling to handle those things. That's what I'm talking about, blood or bodily fluids. Like you don't want to change any diapers or bandage any scraped knees without gloves on. Okay, so your hours are worth $25.15 an hour towards our matching grant program, as long as you record them. So I'll say it again and again and again. We need you to record your hours, please. Let's look at what that looks like. So if on this screen, you'll see if you go to the home page and then log hours. So there's a tab that says hours. And then you draw, and under activity, Lindsay and I actually assign you the activity. And based on what you're doing, there might be 2 or 3 things in the drop down. There shouldn't be more than that. But you can just select the one that seems like it fits what you were doing the best. And then you can add a few notes if you want to. Here we go. So you'll see like RIS, coastal match grant, or resettlement, like if you did first friend or employment, donations pickup, you kind of select it based on what you think you did. Then it gives you the opportunity to say, did you donate any items? Did you drive? If you want to describe the donation. The volunteer comments is a place, you do not have to fill this out. You can kind of take as long to fill this out or as little. Like if you're in a hurry and you just want to log your hours, just put the hours in there and save and log another. But if you want to communicate with us, this is something we are checking on a regular basis. So we see these notes. So this is helpful if you're wanting to add information, you're wanting us to know that you did something, not necessarily for accolades, more so that we know that the caseworker doesn't need to do it, or that we asked you to do it. And this, this is kind of in lieu of getting lost in our inbox, honestly. Okay, so it is 4:10. Understand I'm a little bit over my time. So I want to first thank you all for being here. And then I want to open it up to questions, but I understand we've got quite a few people here. So we might have questions from several people. It might take time. So I just want you to know that if you're on here and if time is a concern, I am recording this. I'd be happy to send it to you, and you can fast forward to the end and just see what questions you missed. So if you need to go, I want to be respectful of your time. I want to let you to go. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pull up just the list of people. I'm going to continue to record. I see in the chat section that there are, oh great, that I see. Thank you, Lindsay. I didn't read your text correctly. You were asking for first and last name, so we can make sure we check off whoever was here. So thank you for doing that. So you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can ask it in the chat box. And Lindsay, if you can help me if I miss anybody in the chat box. I'm going to turn on this lamp, which might give some back glow, but it's getting dark in here. Do we have any questions?
Actually, my name is Joe Thigpen. My wife somehow got me on this, and I guess it's her name on here. But my name is Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, awesome. Thanks.
One other quick thing. When we make these visits, do you suggest we go in pairs, like a lady and a man together, or 2 men together, or I mean?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to go in pairs just for accountability, so nothing can be said about you,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be mixed gender. You can have same
Okay.
gender go together, and that's fine. You generally would be meeting, if it's the men, you would be probably going to meet with the husband, so you'd want to make sure it was a time the husband was at home. Same
Right.
thing with the women, like you would just want to make sure it was a time that the women were going to be at home. So I have a few questions here. Yes, you can take your families thrifting. One of the questions was, can we take them thrifting? You can. That's awesome. That'd be great. Things to consider if you were doing that is if you needed car seats. A lot of times the families should have them, but it might take some time. Like they wouldn't have them like their first week. That's something we do eventually get to them. So do you have enough space in your car for like, the whole family, or make sure you arrange that I'm going to be taking these people. So who would be watching the children? Make sure that they know that they have their money. It takes, like I said, it takes really almost a month for them to start having currency, that like understanding American currency and having it where they can use it. So not something you want to do in the very beginning, but definitely something you could do. What's the next step? Do we get an email with our login info to begin volunteering? So the email, I can send the next steps email to everyone who is here, which includes creating a profile online. So that's something you do. You set up your login and your password and the information for the background check. So that would be the next step. There are a couple of groups here that we have, people who are wanting to volunteer in groups. So if you're an individual, then we would just take you through that next step process to becoming a first friend. If you're with a group, then we kind of be going back to like the team leader and saying, okay, here's the people in your group that were ready, and we'll try to get a group together to volunteer with a family. So that kind of be the next step. One of the questions is, can we assist with finding an appropriate place of worship after a while? I think it's wonderful. So I didn't want to tell too many stories because I was so conscious of the time, but one of my favorite stories that almost brings me to tears every time was that I was working with this mega Baptist church in Atlanta. Like if I told you the name or the pastor's name, you would immediately know who I'm talking about. And I had a group of women who came alongside a Syrian family when they first arrived and worked out a transportation just between the women. They came up with like a plan of transportation to help the family get back and forth to their local mosque because it wasn't within walking distance. And they took them and didn't ask any questions, just were clear, like literally like an Uber driver, taking them to and from the mosque. That allowed them, that was just something they did in the very beginning. They, over time became friends with these women, built a relationship. They did birthday parties. They ended up hosting a funeral of one of the family members at their church because they were able to provide the church space. And not every culture or religion would allow that for a funeral to be held in a different religion's place of worship, but they did. And then they also celebrated Ramadan with the family. And they were very clear that during this time, I'm going to be fasting and praying to my God, the God that I choose to believe is the one and only. But I want to do this with you. And so they fasted with them. They broke the fast. It took several years, 2-ish years, but now several of those families, the Syrian families, are actually going to the church now, the Christian church, over time, because eventually what a couple of the families said, not all of them, but a couple of the families said, we had been, for us, this was a religion and an obligation, something we had been told that we had to believe. And over time, like the Christian's faith and out of love, they were like, what you worship out of love, we worshiped out of duty. And now that we're here in the US and we have freedom of religion, where there was no freedom. We were not given an option of what to believe or who to believe or who to worship. Now that we have that choice, they were choosing to become Christians. And so that definitely happened over time, and it definitely wasn't every single one of the families that they took to the mosque, right? So that can't be your goal. But I just thought it was a really beautiful story of friendship. So yes. Okay, what about children participating? Can my kids, 8, and 11, help? What can they do to help? I love having families volunteer with families. It's one of my favorite things about my job is that I can say this is a family-friendly volunteer opportunity. I have 2 kids myself. They've been volunteering, forever, ever since they were able to. They know that's just part of being my child, is that you volunteer with refugees. So ideally you would, if I'm able, I would try to pair you. If you're with a group, then I can't pair you with a family that has children the same ages of everyone in your group, right? But sometimes if I just have a family volunteering, I try to pair them with a refugee family who have kids the same age, where they can just be friends. What can they do? They can just be friends with them. Honestly, being a mom is universal, and it really helps bridge the gap of language, because a mom's a mom's mom, no matter where you are, you're a mom. And so there's an understanding, kind of mutual understanding there of worrying about your kids and trying to do the best for your kids and things like that. So and if they're paired with a family who have kids that are younger, they can come and play with the kids, kick a soccer ball, or help with homework if it's, if that's something that they can help with. So definitely, families can definitely volunteer together. I love that. I think it really helps bridge the gap. And honestly, our refugee families, our immigrant families want to know about your family. So even if you're single, they're going to ask about your siblings or your parents, your job. They always want to know about your family. So yeah, we can send out the link to everyone who is here. We'll have everyone's email address. So that was one of the questions I got asked, is if we could send the link. So we'll make sure everyone has it. You can share it with other people in your group who weren't able to come, or rewatch it yourself if you'd like to, if there was a point you wanted to write down and you didn't get to. All right, so I think then, go ahead.
When would we hear from our background checks, or how would we hear?
Yeah, so if you submit a background check on like a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, I usually get results on Friday. But if it's like Wednesday, really depends on when it is on Wednesday, then I don't get results till the following Friday. So I usually say 2 weeks at most on the background checks. So if you have submitted it already, there's a good chance that right now what I'm doing, especially for the groups, is I just have a spreadsheet where I'm just checking that you've completed your background check, and completed means I've received that you passed it. So if you've submitted it, I don't always follow up once I receive it. The only reason it's like no news is good news. I follow up if something comes up on it that I need to discuss. So if you submitted your background check and you haven't heard from me, within 2 weeks, I will have gotten the result of that. And you can follow up with me if you'd like, but most likely you can know that I've already got it.
What percentage of the families from Afghanistan would want to go to eat halal meat? We need to find halal groceries.
I would say 100%.
Okay.
I haven't seen that happen. So yeah.
Now, I've worked with Humphrey Fellows who will eat kosher. They say that's acceptable.
Yeah, I think it's something you can ask.
Okay. Yeah.
It's best to assume halal, and then you can ask. I mean,
Right.
We are seeing some of our families are very modern and progressive, but then we have some that are really traditional. So, yeah.
So, just ask. Yeah.
All right, so it's been almost an hour and a half. So like I said, I really want to be aware of people's time. If you think of a question and you're like, oh man, I didn't think of that in time, Lindsay and I are totally available to answer questions. We want to be here to support you guys. Like I say, that's our job. Is our caseworkers are here to care for our clients, and we're here to care for you. So please know that we're here, available. We want to support you through this process. We don't know what we don't know. So like if you have a question that we haven't thought to answer, please just send it to us, because we want to make sure that you have all the answers that you need and that you feel equipped. I know for me personally, just for those who are here in the Atlanta area, I'll go ahead and mention that I'm going to be out of town. Ideally, pending a negative COVID test, I'm going to be out of the country for a couple of weeks. So this is my last week working, and then I'll be gone until December. Lindsay will be available to answer questions while I'm gone if you need something. And if not, I'll be following up with everyone and everything when I get back in December. All right, well, thank you guys for your time. I'll go ahead and cut off this recording and end this meeting, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon, and I look forward to serving with you for sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great trip.
Thanks.
Hi, Janice. We went to
Hello.
the next together.